Thank you, members of the commission. Name is Jim Rubens from Hanover, New Hampshire. A little bit of background: I was a former state senator, Republican, representing District 5 in New Hampshire. I ran for United States Senate as a Republican in the primary in the years 2014 and 2016. Lost those primaries. I was a former chairman of the GOP Platform Committee in New Hampshire. I'm the chairman of the board for Take Back Our Republic. Chairman of the New England division of Take Back Our Republic, the leading conservative organization favoring campaign reform. I've just joined the board of American Promise, working on a 28th Amendment. I have testified in a significant number of states all over the country, mostly red states, in favor of, on behalf of various organizations, on behalf of passage of the 28th Amendment, either by the state-led amending process, the Article 5 state-led amending process, or encouraging Congress, as American Promise is working on, encouraging Congress to draft the language to be sent back to the states for potential ratification. And I'm going to speak about why Republicans support the 28th Amendment through either of the two paths, either of the two Article 5 pathways. And I'm going to talk about 5 reasons, which are a subset of the reasons that might explain why Republicans support this. The first one is the threat to capitalism, free market capitalism. And you can see the shape of the 2020 presidential and national elections is being shaped by Republicans into a contest between the preservation of capitalism and the growing support among the public for some form of socialism, capitalism versus socialism. And my view is, and the view of many Republicans, is capitalism is being supplanted by crony capitalism, where large organizations, particularly business organizations, in order to meet the needs of their shareholders and their corporate objectives, have to go out and buy policy from Congress. And they do that because they're forced to do it by being extorted by members of Congress who will threaten a particular bill which is adverse to a particular industry in order to elicit campaign contributions which result in the removal of that bill from the legislative calendar, or they give money to buy policy. So increasingly, free market capitalism replaced by crony capitalism. Companies will go to Washington, buy politics through a process of lobbying and campaign contributions in order to get special contracts, in order to get tax benefits, in order to get contracts, in order to get their needs met. And the result of this is the public is aware of this now. The public is aware we don't have free market capitalism anymore. We have companies going to Washington feathering their nests. The result of this is that we have less competition, reduced innovation, reduced new business formation, and the flow of products and services, innovative products and services, to consumers in the United States is being suppressed by this process. Capitalism, free market capitalism, the engine of prosperity globally, which has been husbanded here in the United States of America, is under threat. And so we see in opinion polling over the last couple of years, young people, a majority of young people now have a favorable impression about socialism. Non-white voters have a favorable impression of socialism and a disfavoring impression about capitalism. So for Republicans who want to protect and preserve free market capitalism as distinguished from crony capitalism, this process of big money buying candidates and buying policy in Congress is a threat to a fundamentally important goal, structure supported by conservatives and Republicans, and no doubt Democrats too. So that's item one. Item number 2. That causes conservatives and Republicans to support a 28th Amendment is the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. We hear a lot about the First Amendment. The 10th Amendment reserves to the states and to the people respectively all powers not expressly delegated to Congress. What we see now big money is now federalizing elections across the country. You see swing races both for U.S. Senate, the couple I was involved in, and swing races for Congress are targeted by people in New York and San Francisco, people billionaires. They target the swing races. They go as far as selecting candidates, importing them into states. You can import a U.S. Senate candidate into a state without any residency requirement prior to the time when they announced their campaign. And the result of this is elections are no longer being, even the selection of candidates and the viability of candidates is no longer being governed and run by the people who live in the state and the people purportedly represented by the candidates. So you see elections and issues being federalized and made more uniform among the 50 states. And so the huge benefits in our Constitution, the framers of our Constitution wanted laboratories of democracy where states would be empowered to solve their individual problems in ways that might best meet the need of that particular state. And what might work in Massachusetts might not work as well in New Hampshire. And then states can look at the various approaches taken by the states, and states that have figured out a way to solve policy problems better, other states can look at that and mimic it or replicate it. So the benefits of the 10th Amendment are being suppressed and even eliminated in swing districts around the country by this big money system, this corrupt big money system. So that's item number 2. And I testified recently in Pennsylvania to the leadership of both the House and Senate in Pennsylvania. We're run by conservatives. Both bodies are run by conservatives. And I described this problem with the 10th Amendment, and in both cases, leadership in the House and Senate side rose up out of their chair angry that someone in San Francisco had picked candidates in various districts, not just for federal races, but for state-level races. For state-level races, people in San Francisco determining who viable candidates for the state Senate would be, rose up out of their chair, bothered by this. So conservatives bothered by this process. Number 3, another reason that conservatives and Republicans support increasingly a 28th Amendment is in the past, Republicans have been better at the dark money game than Democrats. And this changed in the year 2018. 2018, Democrats wised up and no longer wanted to be outgunned, outplayed by Republicans in this game, and now have, in 2018 data, more money and using it better than Republicans. So in New Hampshire, we have seen this in the 2018 elections. Our House and our state Senate, our state House and our state Senate were taken over by Democrats as a result of outside money, and we heard some testimony about large sums of money being amalgamated, outside money coming in and changing the nature of our own in-state legislative leadership. And these are people from out of state. So the GOP, we've discovered, no longer has an edge in this process. Item number 4 is progressives are motivated for the 28th Amendment on the basis of certain issues, maybe health care, maybe other issues, maybe income inequality, maybe immigration. There are issues that motivate Republicans and conservatives that are being blocked. And I'll just name one of them, which is the debt problem. The United States government is deeply in debt and getting into debt at a rate of $1 trillion a year. I personally link that problem in Congress with this corrupt campaign money system. Again, it ties back to crony capitalism, companies seeking to feather their nest and get production contracts or contracts from the government or tax breaks. They don't really care about the general interest in having a stable currency and stable long-term inflation. And I believe this corrupt big money process results in the more rapid than otherwise accretion of debt by the United States government. And last item, very simple, in a recent poll, 66% of Republican voters back this 28th Amendment process. 2/3 of Republican voters back this. The number is higher among progressives and Democrats, but when you have 2 out of 3 members of the party that's supposed to be more concerned about not doing this, it illustrates why this change will happen. Don't know when, but it will happen. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony, and I hope you'll forgive me for putting you on the spot, but we don't often get elected officials, former elected officials, maybe with the luxury of now having been a former elected official. I would just ask you honestly, as a candidate and as a former elected official, and I wouldn't ask the direct question of, did you ever find yourself in a position to have been corrupted by donors or contributions, but did you feel pressure to act a certain way because you were working with either cultivating a donor or because you were aware of a contribution? Did you feel pressure to vote a particular way?
Of course, but my personality, it was irrelevant, completely irrelevant to me.
Thank you. I appreciate the honest answer. Now,
Yeah.
let me ask you,
Yeah.
would you have felt greater pressure for someone who had given a bigger contribution? In other words, was the degree of pressure tantamount to the level of the contribution?
Yeah. I'll answer in the way that most people will answer. People give me large sums of money because they agree with my positions. They have no influence over my position. So you'll hear that type of answer
Yes.
very frequently.
That's one of the biggest problems with trying to disentangle the effects of corporate money in politics, is because it's hard to know whether candidates and elected officials are getting contributions because they believe in these positions already, or because those are causing them to vote a certain way.
Yeah, I think you can look at the 2014, 2015 Princeton study that you're probably all familiar with, distinguishing the relative influence of average voters and the relative influence of big money sources, primarily large businesses. Are you familiar with that?
This is Marty Gilman's
familiar
book.
with that study?
Yes.
Okay. So that's good quality evidence that large sums of money can impact on policy. Just yesterday, in yesterday's newspaper, The Intercept published a story about two individual members of Congress, one of whom is now a U.S. Senator, were given $1.4 million to put forward a bill to handcuff the Drug Enforcement Administration and prevent the DEA from fingering and slowing down the excess distribution of opioids. This is back several years ago. We now know, in hindsight, we know, and even then we knew that opioids were killing people. So two members of Congress given $1 million for drug distributors like McKesson, a couple of other companies, we don't know all of them, wrote the bill. The bill got passed, signed by President Obama. President Obama had no comment about this story. That's the type of example we can talk about where money buy. Now, did these two members of Congress genuinely believe it's good for pill mills to give tremendous amounts of opioids to communities in West Virginia? I don't think so. But I can tell you from my personal experience, this big money process, because I'm more of an underdog type candidate, when I ran in 2016 for U.S. Senate, $135 million was spent on that U.S. Senate election in New Hampshire. $135 million. 95% of the money came from out of state. That money has nothing to do with the needs of New Hampshire citizens. The race was very close, the sums of money very, very large. And when you're subjected to that kind of sum of money, if you can't at the outset raise it and you don't have it pinned to your back, the media does not pay attention to you. Any issue or any position that you might have that is not pinned and supported by this type of large sums of money, that issue is irrelevant in the campaign process. So I've been on the losing side of this process. It's horrible. It means that debate is narrowed, the viability of candidates that might be carrying issues that are important, those candidates are not viable. It's horrible for the process of solving problems. It's a contributor to gridlock in the U.S. Congress.
Thank you.
We welcome Commissioner Malone, who has fought her way through traffic. Thank you, Bopa.
Thank you. Thank you.
And, of course, Cheryl's here. Yep.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions from members of the commission for Senator Rubens?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yeah, you have fascinating testimony, Senator, and thank you for coming and
You're most welcome.
giving us your take. And you mentioned that you've been across the country. So I guess it's safe to say that New Hampshire's not like a deep red state. So I like to hear some of your observations of some of the deeper red states that you've been to, and the reaction you've gotten from some of your Republican brethren in some of those states, and maybe other parties. So I'd like for you to just kind of allude to that. And
Yeah, I've testified and worked in Texas back when it was totally red, and in Missouri, which is very red. Pennsylvania, I just mentioned Pennsylvania, which is conservative leadership. They were a Democratic governor, but conservative leadership in both their bodies, their House and Senate, and used some of the arguments I've used here, and have interfaced with leadership in committee leadership and body leadership in those states. And this issue has meaning to these folks. It's important to come at this issue with for progressives, with respect for what motivates conservatives, and this issue should be very, very careful not to make this a progressive issue that we're going to ram down your throat because progressives are right and conservatives are wrong, and by getting the 28th Amendment, we're finally going to get progressive issues, and we're going to suppress conservative policy objectives. That's very much the wrong way to deal with this. Come at these folks with respect for positions, and the argument that some of the principled objectives of Republicans and conservatives can be better achieved if we restore power to the states. State power is a very important issue to members in red states. Legislators in red states really are very, very upset about federalizing elections, power coming in from outside, people in San Francisco and Manhattan selecting candidates and choosing members of their bodies. That particular issue motivates red state legislators more than I think any other issue that I mentioned there of those five.
So it's not totally like an economic or corporate influence perspective. It's more like it's an interference.
Outside interference, messing with my state the way, and I'm speaking I'm thinking of a red state committee chairman or chairwoman. Someone in San Francisco coming into my state and picking members of my committee and determining which issues are important in my state and who's going to represent my state in Washington really upsets people. So that's why I speak about the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which is there. It's part of the Bill of Rights, and we keep hearing about the First Amendment as an objection to this 28th Amendment. Well, we got to think from a conservative point of view about the 10th Amendment. Very important to people.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator. And full disclosure, I'm president of American Promise when I'm not on the commission, and look forward to working with Jim Rubens on our board. But I did have a question for you as well. I think I've seen you on panels and testifying, and seen you go wherever the cause takes you to work with progressive Democrats, independents, Republicans, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And that sometimes seems all too lacking in our American life today. And one of the jobs of this commission is to figure out and make recommendations how we move this forward together. And so I wonder if you alluded to it in terms of, encouraging progressives to respect conservative arguments and maybe make some of these conservative arguments rather than sort of pounding progressive arguments. But are there other things that you would offer for the commission and for, frankly, citizens about how you have found it yourself able to do what the media tells us we can't do, which is work with people we disagree with, talk with people you disagree with, try to accomplish something even though you don't agree with somebody. What would you have for the commission or the people on that?
Right. The right and left are probably not going to agree on how to fix health care. So that should not be the objective of what you're doing here with the 20th Amendment. What our objective is to protect two of the very most fundamental core institutions of the United States, our system of government. People have lost confidence in our system of government. People don't trust it. It doesn't represent people anymore, and it's handcuffed. It's stalemated right now. So we have a mutual interest, apart from our particular policy objective, in a government that actually can govern, that can solve problems. The public has discovered that it's not working and has lost confidence. Our system, our economic system, our free market economic system, people have progressively lost confidence in this fundamental institution, United States. We have a common interest in the prosperity fostered by free market capitalism and pushing back against crony capitalism, which is a direct result of this corrupt big money system. So where we're unified, unity among our poles of concern is protecting these fundamental institutions of the United States that are predicates of the freedom and prosperity that we enjoy in our country. We have a mutual interest in those things being fostered and held up.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
I've got it.
6:30, any other questions from the commission?